From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know.
We're back. All right. Look, at best, we can call the efficacy of sanctions, the degree to which they work, debatable. And that's not because it's at heart a terrible idea. It's because it's very difficult to measure their level of success. First, you have to define their level of success, and that can be tricky on its own. I want to introduce the director of the Masters in International Security degree program, as well as the Center for Security Policy Studies at George Mason University, one Ellen Leipson, who says, look, if we're just going to summarize, she says, look, if it's your intention to punish a country, then just measuring the economic pain you've inflicted on that country, yeah, that's a way of saying it worked, right? Like, we tanked the economy, therefore success, go team. Let's get on another naval vessel and have a big ass sign that says mission accomplished. Let's get that photo op.
Yeah, those are cool.
Don't do it. It doesn't work out. It doesn't work out historically. Mm-hmm. Like, history judges that kind of action very, very poorly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, Ben, I was going to ask you, like, so, I mean, obviously many things are ideological in government in terms of, like, this is going to be our thing, either as a party or as a candidate or as a, an elected official. Would you say that sanctions, or the idea of kind of carrots and sticks, is one of those? Where it's like, there's some people that just believe in it all in, like, this is the way, and we're going to, work our diplomatic magic and affect change across the world with this brilliant series of sanctions. And then there are some maybe that don't lean into it as hard and think what you're saying, that maybe it's debatable.
I think
whether they work or not.
Yeah, I think it's, you raise a really interesting point. So across the history of the U.S., political parties, members of any political party, have been for sanctions in the past, unless they're absolute isolationist, which is incredibly rare these days. But what we do see is that when sanctions are politically convenient, they get support. So if you are a politician who has seen a lot of good polling numbers every time you say, I hate Russia or I hate China, and I'm very hawkish on those two countries or something, then of course you're going to reply. You're going to give your audience what they want, because they're not going to ask you hard policy questions. And you can always defer, because you're only really going to be talking on the news for a couple minutes at a time, unless you really screw up. So you don't have to explain your actual calculus. All you have to do is respond, is create the feedback loop of what people want. And that is the nature of politics. It's one of the broken things about that system. But you're right. So it happens case by case, when convenient for domestic powers, or when they feel like there is a existential threat to global security, or, to the US. So they would say, hey, we've all had our differences, but Iran just cannot have a nuclear bomb. Right? We can agree on that, right? And then, like, the very far right people are saying, like, yeah, I don't think the very far right people are like, we should have the most nukes, right? And the far left people are like, well, I would like for there not to be any nukes, but we can agree that Iran shouldn't have any. And they're like, all right, deal. We'll team up for this one. That's how that kind of stuff happens. And
there's similar teaming up against groups like Al Qaeda and ISIL, ISIS, and those where sanctions,
right? Because
are pretty much universally agreed.
Yes, because no one wants to risk political suicide by saying, "Hold on, right? Like, I know terrorists are bad, but I think these sanctions are an overreach," because that first line wouldn't make it into the news. You would be the person where it's like, Senator Scully Brownstone or whatever comes out in support of ISIS. That's what people would remember. They wouldn't think you had some nuanced standing on policy and philosophy of market forces, even if you did, even if like your degree was in that, it wouldn't matter. So yeah, people aren't going to do that. But what if we try to measure success not by the financial pain inflicted on innocent people in a country and the country's rulers, maybe, but what if we tried to measure it by seeing the change in the country's behavior? Did the country begin to do the stuff you wanted to push them into doing or tempt them into doing? Did you carrot them right with like an aid package? See, that's the nice side of sanctions, right? The kind of stuff like that, aid package, technical assistance, support, logistics, that kind of stuff. You can give actors things too. But if you try to measure the degree of change in behavior, you have to use a way different metric. And in that case, by that definition, which is the actual definition you should be using, right? By that definition, most sanctions clearly fail because countries like people become resistant. They'll be willing to absorb pain for the reasons of pride, for nationalism. They don't want to concede to this bigger country that is very easily seen as a bully, and often with good reason. They imagine, even if they're not thinking of it in these trope terms, they imagine a David versus Goliath situation. You know what I mean? Just because my country is smaller than yours does not give you the right to act as though you rule us. And that's a good point as well. You know, like you said, U.S. leaned hard on Cuba. The USSR was waiting with open arms. They said, we get you. Not only do we get you, this is one of the petty things. I love the petty details. They were like, not only do we get you, not only have your back, bro, but we're going to, all that sugar you can't sell, we're going to buy it and we're going to purposely overpay for it. So 5 times what you're supposed to pay for a kilo. That's you. Take it. Go do something nice. Do something good for yourself. Do you like missiles? We get a lot of missiles. I'm going to send you some missiles. Okay. Don't worry about this. And they were doing that to support the country, but they were also inevitably on some level doing it because they knew it would piss off the U.S. It was a flex.
Yeah. They also knew it would kind of scare the U.S. I'm just bringing this back to foreign policy that's occurring right now as we're recording this because of the proximity to the United States, where the USSR was operating. And very similarly to where there are major issues in Ukraine right now, I would posit, and I'm no expert here, because of the proximity to the Russian Federation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, ultimately what you want is hegemony. You want to go from being a regional power to ultimately being a global power. So that's where you get into the concept of vassal states or client states, I believe would be the the proper terminology, because nobody likes to bring up the concept of serfdom and vassalhood, even when it is very appropriate. Anyway, you want de facto, in practice, sovereignty over neighboring countries. You want to have the most influence, right? And you also, ideally, don't want to have the responsibility and accountability you would have if they were really part of your country. You know what I mean? So the idea is it's a devil's bargain. Do what we say. We'll protect you from the wolves across the way. Though we are, in this case, also a wolf.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, just as another quick example there, Ben, I keep thinking about North Korea and just how gloriously unsuccessful sanctions against North Korea have been at getting the quote hermit state to change its oppositional stance to countries around it, right? And like, I mean, how many missile tests has that country done in the past 10 years? And sanctions have been on them, what? Gosh. I mean, the main ones I'm thinking about happened in the mid-90s. And they're still like, I don't know. It almost hardened their position, I would say.
Good point.
It just occurred to me the hermit state, I guess, refers to the fact that they don't ever really leave the house.
Mm-hmm.
You know, or at least the global house.
Yeah. And also, that's a really interesting Of course, I'm going to say that. Don't feel like that has to be part of a drinking game because you'll drink too much. But geopolitically, it's really interesting because out of all the countries in the region and then other countries involved in things like the six-party talks, like the U.S., they don't really want the peninsula to reunite. China doesn't really want South Korea or a democratic South Korea right on its border like that. It's already close enough. And of course, the families have been ripped apart by the Korean War. And these beautiful moments when people on different sides of the borders can reunite after decades. And both the Republic of Korea and the DPRK do publicly state they would love to reunify the peninsula, but they each think their government should be in charge when that reunification occurs. And the power, like the global superpowers, aren't particularly pressuring this country, North Korea, to open up ultimately, because before Russian power really started deteriorating, they were a powerful ally of DPRK. And also nobody talks about this, but for a while, average quality of life in DPRK was better than it was in the Republic of Korea. That's very much not the case now. But anyway, yes, what I'm saying is your example holds. The backyard reasoning is real here, and it's very much a NIMBY situation, not in my backyard, say world powers. But
I love that movie, The Secret of NIMBY.
Yes, I like it too.
Yeah,
I was going to actually have a movie night and put it on a big projector outside, just not in my backyard, maybe one of yours.
No joke, though. The Secret of NIMBY is one of my favorite animated movies of all time.
It's good.
It's very sad, but it is beautiful. I watched it with my kid when she was like maybe 7 or 8, and I cry at Pixar movies, to be fair, but I cried a lot as an adult watching The Secret of NIMBY.
So that reminds me of one of the biggest points we have to talk about today. And so one of the last points of this episode, unintended consequences. I wanted to see this movie. I didn't know it would turn on the wet works, or as our good pal Chandler Mays says, send the onion ninjas to my house, which took me forever to understand that. Like, I feel like you walked down the street to make that reference.
Oh my God, you sure did, but it's quite brilliant. You know what? The Secret of NIMBY is also about unintended consequences of progress. Mm-hmm. And
so the unintended consequences here are not super smart rodents. Spoiler alert, but I didn't ruin it for you. It's about this. Like,
it's on the back cover.
Yeah, it's in the blurb. Picture this. Let's say you are targeting a country that is ruled by an authoritarian, oppressive regime, and you're targeting them because you want them to quit their human rights abuses. You want them to stop threatening adjacent countries and becoming bellicose and pushing for war, or annexing places, or stealing resources, or aiding and abetting terrorism. You name it, all the hits, all the good ones. And then you say, okay, we're going to hit them with a massive economic sanction. And the goal of this is we are going to make their current actions so increasingly expensive, so cost prohibitive, that it will be to their financial advantage to start creating first a less aggressive government and then a more democratic government. And those things never happen in a vacuum. There are a lot of other levers they could pull with that now. But that's the basic. Well, here's the problem. The vast majority of that population, if they're living in an authoritarian or corrupt regime, they have no say in politics, just like we were pointing out in like a Cuban situation. They don't really have a say. They will be first in line to suffer the consequences of this stuff. And the people in power, the people you're trying to intimidate or squeeze or smack with the political stick a little bit, they're like the only folks in those countries who have the connections and influence to soften the blow and still get what they want. Oh, I can't officially get that McLaren or that giant whale skeleton that I wanted for my second mansion. I'll just call my other dictator buddy.
You know what? you don't want those things. That's a lot of responsibility.
He's got someone for that. He's got whale skeleton people already. He walks by and looks at it. Shout out again to Putin's mansion in the interior of that. But what will happen then is they have the opportunity and the wherewithal to use proxy companies, right, to have other forces, third parties get around those sanctions. And it happens all the time whenever it's advantageous for that third party to help someone. So what this means is this sanction could accidentally and quickly become widespread collective punishment inflicted on people whose lives weren't already super great to begin with. Part of the UN itself, who's big in the sanctions game, agrees with this. Even they play a huge role in the imposition of sanctions. And as recently as 2021, they found that unilateral sanctions in particular, which was very a cough, cough, U.S. cough, cough statement, they said those in particular cause innocent people living in those countries to sink into poverty. They can't get electricity, housing, water, gas, fuel, basic stuff. And what is that going to do? Are they going to be like, I am suffering because this country I have never visited is right about this country in which I was born?
Not to mention they don't let you get your gold medal.
You don't get the gold medal, right? You don't get the medicine. You don't get the food.
Can I just point out quickly a source that we found for this? It actually comes from the UN itself. It's news.un.org. And the title of this article is Punishment of, quote, innocent civilians through government sanctions must end, according to UN experts.
Which is...
Yeah. I mean, wouldn't that fall under collateral damage? I mean, these aren't bombs, but they have unintended consequences, which is what collateral casualties surrounding targeted, military assaults.
That's part of the...
It's not dissimilar.
Part of the logic. And I do want to point out that report came from a group of independent experts who were appointed by the Human Rights Council, which is its own bag of badgers. And there are many, many arguments out there about the overall accuracy of the Human Rights Council and whether it might be rigged, because there have been member states on the Human Rights Council in the past who have just astonishingly bad domestic human rights records. Anyway, so there are going to be people who say it's a poison source, but those were independent experts, and they did say to the people who make a lot of sanctions, hey, sanctions are bad. We get what you're going for, but it's bad. And if we go to like what you're bringing up, Noel, on the other side of sort of the octopus here, people imposing sanctions, no, they're not perfect, but they believe they're making a call in favor of the greater good. The calculus is like, okay, is it better for us to run the risk of making lives of innocent people measurably worse if it means we can prevent a dangerous government from getting and deploying like an atomic bomb? You know what I mean? Is life going to be less cool for some people so that other people can survive? Or should we just let those ponies ride? You know what I mean? Let those ponies run. It's tough, man. It's a tough question, because the question would be a lot easier to answer if the effects of sanctions were easier to predict. But these days, so many countries, especially the U.S., the overall global West, are convinced that these actions are necessary for continued global peace and security, or, for being cynical, to continue a profitable status quo, right? Like the shadow of colonialism looms large. There's a reason that the West has taken so many actions in the Middle East and so many actions on the African continent, and it's not to help the people who live there.
Resources.
Yes. Yeah. So at this point, it's reasonable to ask, why are you talking about this on stuff they don't want you to know, guys? Well, it's a problem of transparency. It's a problem of consent. The innocent people most likely to be victimized by sanctions are, in theory, some of the same people those sanctions are supposed to help. They don't get a say in international affairs. They don't get to talk in Congress. They don't get to speak to the UN. In fact, I was thinking about this. In fact, these harsh economic conditions, these empty grocery stores, the inability to get a job, all of that kind of stuff, all that fallout, these things can often be directly traced to sanctions, and they can they can run the risk of radicalizing the population, bolstering support for the same regimes this sanction seeks to topple. So I don't know, it's a way of adding fuel to the fire, and it seems such a transparent problem in logic here that it must be impossible for at least some of the people imposing sanctions not to know this, which calls their motivations for the sanctions themselves into question. Is that too much of a stretch?
No, I don't think so at all.
I don't think so either.
I'm just glad we've got a better understanding of it, though it does feel like it may not be the best move, because if you don't want to radicalize someone further, you don't want to cause further tensions, it seems like sanctioning someone is maybe a bad idea.
And it can also, if you push a government to a desperate place, it starts considering other options, right? Like whenever you have any,
and we don't like those options.
Entity cornered, yeah. Well, and honestly, not a lot of people do. So you're right when we talk about this. Look, we don't have the answers. These can be dangerous situations. The right level of economic sanctions can absolutely just wreck a country, and that means it'll be very dangerous for the people who live in that country. When elephants make war, it is the grass that suffers, and so on. So with this, we want to leave it to you. What do you think? Sanctions. Are you for them? Are you against them? Are they worth it? Do they work? What would be the alternative?